14. Dinner with new friends. Claudia. After John left, I helped Michael set the table early so that I could find a nice dress to wear for dinner. Yes, I was going to wear a dress. I wanted to look my best. Michael came in and stood at the kitchen entrance as I set the china out. "What?" I asked as I set the last dish down. He smiled. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine, Michael," I said with a slight frown. Sometimes he made me feel like such a kid. God, I was almost 18. "You know I worry about you," Michael said. There he went again with his fatherly lectures. "I'm sorry I had to be tough on you." I realized what he was getting at. "I know how much you wanted to go to that party, but, Michael, please, not right now," I said. "Can we just enjoy this evening without talking about that?" Really, the party didn't even matter anymore. What if he knew that I not only sneaked out, but also John Slater had come into my room? Not to mention I was the reason there was now a huge hole in the parking lot at Milton High. God, if he only knew. He would probably board up my bedroom window or cut down the tree. I didn't know what would be worse for him, the hole in the parking lot or John being in my room. "You understand, I'm only trying to do what's best for you." I came to stand before him, simply because I had to get into the kitchen and get the rest of the forks and knives. "Yes, I know, but you don't have to treat me like a child. I'm almost 18, I said. Michael smiled. He seemed to utter something like, "Where is the time gone?" I guessed he was just starting to realize that he came into my life when I was ready for my independence. He moved aside, realizing he was standing in my way. I opened the drawer and pulled out a few knives and forks. As I turned, he said, "Do you think we should invite Mr. Vasquez and Mr. Claypool? I feel like I've neglected them somehow." "I thought it was just going to be John, Joseph, and us," I said. "Well, yeah, but I just thought about James and Richard, and it would be nice to have them over as well. So are you okay with Dr. Mueller now?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "Why?" "Well," I could tell he didn't know how to answer. "He was a little rough on you before. I could understand if you weren't. In fact, I didn't think you would be okay with him here." "I've gotten past that. Besides, he apologized. We've made up." Michael wrinkled his eyes, unsure what exactly that meant. I couldn't blame him. I wasn't entirely sure what it meant either. We were definitely on better terms, though. "Well, that's good, I guess. How are you and John? You know, he's a nice young man. I think he makes a good fit for you." I agreed. "I like him," I said. "I like him a lot." Michael gave a smile. "That's good. You need someone like him in your life, someone normal and down to earth." If he only knew, I thought, John was anything but down to earth and normal. I smiled a little. He wrinkled his nose in thought. "You know, I think I'll invite Miss Stevens, too." My mouth dropped. Why? Didn't we have enough people already? Michael hadn't even paid attention to what I had said. I guess I didn't mind if Mr. Claypool and Mr. Vasquez joined us, but Miss Stevens? Who was she even? "Miss Stevens?" I uttered, walking back into the dining room as he counted the spots on the table. "Claudia, be a dear and add another spot." "Michael!" I nearly shouted at him. Michael looked up, confused as to why I was suddenly upset. "Who is Miss Stevens?" I asked, "and why are we inviting her?" He didn't answer right away, distant as he counted the spots again on the table. "She's one of the English teachers," he quickly answered. I wrinkled my nose at him, knowing there was more. "Oh, and I think she and Dr. Mueller might be dating. I thought it would be a nice gesture to invite her over. What do you think?" I blinked my eyes up at him. I didn't really care, but this dinner for 4 was turning into a social affair. I concentrated on putting the forks and knives by each of the china plates, along with the napkins. "Why do we have to? I mean, don't you think that's already too many people? I doubt Miss Stevens would even want to come to our house." I knew the woman he was talking about now, and she was my least favorite. She was so vain and rude. Why would a person like Joseph want anything to do with her? But then again, it was obvious. She was very attractive. I already called her, Michael softly said. She said she'd love to. I thought I'd ask you first, but I thought if John mentioned something to you in regards to his uncle and Miss Stevens, it wouldn't be a big deal. I didn't think it would bother you having her here. I fidgeted, wrinkling my nose back. Why would he think that? Maybe he knew more than I realized. I could feel a blush creeping up my neck. Michael, come on. Why would it bother me? Well, Miss Stevens is... He cleared his throat. He was trying to put whatever he was going to say in the best way possible. Can be hard to get along with, and you're quite outspoken yourself. I thought that maybe since you and Joseph weren't on good terms, it would be best... never mind, Michael said, examining the expression on my face. Michael? I didn't know what he meant by that comment about me. I cut him off. I wasn't anything like that witch, was I? If you want to invite her, it's fine with me, I said, a little resentfully. After all, he'd already extended the invitation. What was I going to do about it now? He gazed back at me. Are you sure? I narrowed my eyes at him. Michael, I'm sure. Joseph, Dr. Mueller would appreciate it, I said, trying to swallow my pride. Michael nodded. Well, I'm done here, I said politely, regarding setting up the dinnerware. I'm going to get dressed. Michael stared over. Dressed? But I thought you weren't planning on dressing up. I think it's only proper to dress up for dinner. It's not often that we have a special dinner with friends, I offered. Michael shrugged his shoulders and said, You're right. Okay, go on then. I headed to the second floor and entered my bedroom, closing the door behind me. I thought about what Michael had said about Joseph and Miss Stevens. I honestly didn't have a problem with it, but I didn't like the woman at all. Whatever. I was more interested in seeing John anyway. Handsome John. John, where are you? Claudia, I'm coming, baby. I just had to stop to do some work, but I'm coming. I promise. My heart lit up when I heard him. The sensation of him vanished. Had he dialed his watch back? Why would he do that? It had to be for a good reason. Maybe Joseph was close. I walked over to my closet and began picking through what I had. I wanted a dress, but I only had a couple of those. I'd never liked wearing them. I think I had two. A red one and a maroon one. I had always loved red, and I chose the one that was red as a freshly bloomed rose. I plucked it from the closet and put it on the bed. Did John like red? No. Blue, that was his favorite color. I could see that. Handsome John in a blue blazer. Oh well, I didn't have any blue dresses. The red one would have to do. John wouldn't mind what I wore. That thought made me blush slightly. John was a sharp dresser, that was a fact. I still couldn't believe he had shared everything with me. I felt so connected to him and so lucky to know him. I loved him, and he knew it. I felt even more connected and complete. He seemed so out of place here among the misfits and chaos. I liked that about him. The way he always protected me. Especially when that man tried to get near me. It made me feel warm to think about it. Even Joseph stood guard. Joseph really was the big guardian that John called him. I missed the protection of a family. I missed my parents. But not as much as I had thought I would. There were parts of my family life I hadn't realized I was missing, and other things I didn't miss, like my father's abusive tone. I walked over to the window. The sun was going down, even though it was only 6. If Dad were here, we would be getting ready for one of his meetings. Or he'd be planning one of his trips to his New York office. I was the dirty secret they both wanted to hide. Why did it take their deaths to make me see that? I wondered what Dad would say about my relationship with John. What would he think of him? I ground my teeth. He might like him because John had a rich family. Well, sort of. Then again, he wouldn't have ever let me out, so we probably would have never met. First, you must learn to control your gift. You think anyone would want to go out with you if they discovered what you can do? What he meant to say was I was a freak. He always scolded me for losing control. I didn't miss his scorn or my mother's lack of concern. When I looked in the mirror, I couldn't see her. Dad always said I looked like Mom, but I didn't believe it. My dad was a handsome man with blonde hair and blue eyes. He was nothing like me. My mom was a very beautiful Latina woman, completely the opposite of my father. Beyond her rich complexion, we shared no similarities. I often wondered why people lied and claimed I did, not just in appearance, but in our personalities. I had never felt emotionally connected to either one of them. I was far more connected to John, and he had been a complete stranger not long ago. I rested my head on the window ledge and watched the sky for a moment. Were they truly in heaven, as the good book said? Did it matter? I guess it didn't anymore. I had more now than I ever had with them in my life. John had offered to take me to New York. I wondered if he meant that. I thought some more about what my parents would say about him. I think my mom wouldn't care for him. John was far too outspoken. They would both be blunt with their thoughts on the matter. My father had been a CEO for a successful financial firm. As far as I knew, he had been in charge of a lot of money, and he had worked a lot of hours. Mom and Dad attended many fancy dinners and sometimes hosted them. I'd hated it. Dad was all business. He had to be tough and hard. He ran his business like he ran his household. The night was cold, and a breeze blew in through the window. Dad might have liked him initially, but I knew once he got to know him he would hate John. John was outspoken, and he wouldn't allow my father to talk to me the way he had. I walked away from the window, looking down at the dress I had chosen for the evening. I meant to go back into the closet to find a pair of shoes when I felt something come alive within me. Suddenly, thoughts of him filled me. Not my parents or John, but him. Only now did I wonder why I hadn't spent any time considering his invitation. I didn't want any part of it, but I couldn't resist him. There was a poison in me when we came together. Once I had thought I wanted him, but now I feared him. "Have you considered my offer, my pet?" his voice said from behind. When I spun around, he was on the ledge of the window, perched like a bird on the edge. He leaped down, landed soundlessly on the floor, and walked deeper into the room. His legs carried him swiftly toward me. I had no time to react before he was within inches of me, nearly touching my lips with his. His body was so close that I could feel his warmth. He looked intoxicated, staring into me with the eyes of a madman, hungry to approach, but for whatever reason being unable to. "Quentin," I hissed. My heart was beating wildly in my chest like a train. What would Dad say about him? "Does it matter?" He took a hold of my chin. "I've missed you. I couldn't bear being away from you for so long," he admitted, looking lost. It seemed he was becoming increasingly intoxicated by the feel of my skin. Immediately, I wanted to be in his arms, flying through the sky like he had taken me to do before. I wanted to be out there again, in the world he knew, in the world he ruled. I felt faint, weakened by his presence. I wanted nothing else but to be with him. "Come away with me," he said. I turned my head away. "Why do you resist me?" He turned my face back towards him. "I want you. And it's obvious you want me," he hissed, inching closer. I pulled away and nervously moved a few steps from him. "Why do you shun me?" he asked, coming closer again. I could feel his breathing. He couldn't resist me, just as I couldn't resist him at times. I fought the pull. "Why me?" I softly asked, turning to face him. I quivered with his closeness. His hypnotizing eyes were staring madly at me. "Because we belong together. Don't you feel the connection between us, my pet? You're mine just as I am yours." He put a hand to my cheek. Let me take you away from all of this. He lifted my chin. I held onto his hand, but this time he was the one that pulled away and walked to stand by the window. I must leave soon. I can no longer stay here, but I want you by my side. He narrowed his eyes over at me again. All you have to do is let me in. Let me make you mine, and you'll never be alone, never be sad, and never be afraid. I felt the butterflies spinning in my stomach. Just come away with me, he said. His eyes were smiling back. You'll never be lonely again. There was a knock at the door. I spun around, startled. I heard Michael on the other side of the door. When I looked back, Quentin was gone. I rushed to the window, but I couldn't find him. Come to me, my pet, the wind whispered. Come to me. I'll be waiting. You know where. I'll be there, waiting. Michael was knocking hard, drowning out the sounds of Quentin's pleas. Through the door he called, Claudia? I opened the door. Michael stood there, his face in a firm line. Why didn't you answer when I called? He demanded. I felt my face burning. I was in the bathroom. God, I was a bad liar. Luckily, Michael was a trusting man. He bought it and asked, Well, are you ready yet? I gave him a frown. What have you been doing for the past 30 minutes? He paused. You know what? Never mind. I know how you girls are about finding the right outfit. Will you mind watching for our guest while I get ready? But, Michael, I'm not finished, I said, glaring up at him. I won't take long, he offered and hurried through the open door of his bedroom, shutting it behind him. Frowning, I headed down the stairs, but not before grabbing the red dress on my bed to admire it while I walked downstairs. My mind was briefly on Quentin, and then, like as if he had never been there, my mind regained its original thought process. It seemed whenever he was around, I couldn't concentrate on anything but him. Once he was gone, it felt like I could easily push the thoughts of him out of my mind. I didn't understand that at all. I feared my weakness, my struggle to resist him. I honestly wanted no part of him. I was in love with John Slater. There was no doubt about that. My thoughts of my parents had only angered me. Daddy was there again, yelling at me, telling me I needed to control my gift. I had thought, however briefly, that I wanted Quentin badly. He told me I wanted him, as if he'd plucked the thought right out of my head. But I didn't. I feared him. I feared the moment when I wouldn't be able to fight him any longer. I didn't want him, so why couldn't I resist him? What was he doing to me? More importantly, how was he doing it? Daddy can't stop me, he hissed inside my brain, laughing. I want you, and you want me. You just haven't realized it. Yet. I shuddered and hurried into the kitchen and tried to think of something else. I saw the red wine on the kitchen counter. Joseph would like it, and I was pretty sure Miss Stevens would as well. I continued trying to distract myself with sampling the mashed potatoes and other dishes until the door rang. From where I was standing, I could see it was Mr. Vasquez and Mr. Claypool. I raced out of the kitchen and hurried toward the doorway to greet them. I could hear Michael from the second floor yell to me to get the door. I'm on it, Michael! I called back. I swung open the door to find both Mr. Vasquez and Mr. Claypool smiling warmly in greeting. Mr. Vasquez hugged me. So did Mr. Claypool. It wasn't until they moved inside that I noticed the blonde woman behind them step forward. Hello. You must be Claudia Bell, Michael's ward. I narrowed my eyes at her. I'm Karen Stevens. But you can call me Miss Stevens, she jokingly said. She walked in ahead of Mr. Claypool and Mr. Vasquez. They didn't say anything as they watched her step forward without an invitation. Cute, she said, looking around. This is a nice little house, she said, not trying to disguise her disgust. She wore a bright red dress. She had bleached blonde hair. I guess Joseph liked blondes. I guess all guys did. I led Mr. Claypool and Mr. Vasquez in through the foyer, closing the door. "So, where's the chef?" Mr. Claypool asked me with a smirk on his face. "He's getting ready," I politely answered, disappointed with the fact that Miss Stevens was wearing my color of choice. I grabbed my dress, putting it behind my back before I could step back up the steps. "Would you guys like anything to drink?" I asked. Miss Stevens spun around when I said that. "Sure, I'll take a cocktail," she rudely said without giving me the slightest look. "We have wine and beer," I politely offered. She frowned. "What kind of wine? I only drink white wine," she spit back. "We only have red." She made a face. How did Joseph actually like this woman? Thinking of Joseph at our last dinner party, I recalled a bottle Michael had in the pantry. "I think Michael might have left a bottle of white." She darted her eyes back at me. "Well, will you be a good girl and see? I just can't drink red. I hope it's good," she said. She dug through her little red purse, grabbing a mirror and checking her lipstick. She had the reddest lips and whitest skin. I was a bit jealous. She was beautiful. I could see why Joseph would want to be with her, as long as she kept her mouth closed. They would be perfect together. She was lovely and looked like an angel. I wondered if John thought she was better looking. I hurried into the kitchen, making faces and sticking my tongue out. Yes, I was mocking her. I staggered to the pantry and swung open the door. I looked for the bottle and found it in the far back of the pantry. I pulled it out and set it on the counter. As I did, I could hear Michael join our three guests near the entrance. They were talking and laughing. I heard Miss Stevens' laughter. God, she sounded like a banshee when she laughed. Soon their voices died down, and I heard Mr. Vasquez and Mr. Claypool retire to the living room. Michael entered with Miss Stevens. She looked over at me, looking for her drink. She noticed the red dress in my hands, and narrowing her eyes over at me, she said, "Well, aren't you lucky you didn't wear that? That would have been embarrassing for you." "Miss Stevens, you wanted white wine, correct?" Michael asked as he saw me and nearly snatched the bottle from my hands. God, what made men into such jerks in front of a beautiful woman? "Claudia, could you make yourself useful and get Mr. Vasquez and Mr. Claypool a beer each, please?" Michael ordered, smiling back at Miss Stevens. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a corkscrew and proceeded to open the bottle. I angrily walked out before grabbing 2 Budweisers from the refrigerator. Both Mr. Claypool and Mr. Vasquez didn't seem to notice me as I set the beers in front of them on the coasters. They were busy watching the game between the Rockets and Lakers. I made a comment that went ignored. Furiously, I walked into the foyer. I noticed Joseph coming up the path of the house to the entrance. Where was John? Joseph had a bottle of wine in one hand and a bouquet of daisies in the other. Daisies, I thought. Did Miss Stevens like daisies? Somehow I doubted it. John must have given those to him for me, I thought with a delightful grin. He looked quite handsome. I wondered if John would get all dressed up for me. The butterflies in my stomach swirled, making me nervous as he neared. Just thinking of John, I was a mess. John bought me daisies, I thought. They were for me, I just knew it. I smiled at the thought. Joseph was walking up the steps, and I wasn't even ready. At once, I rushed up the stairs and ran into my room, closing the door behind me. I tossed the red dress on my bed and hurried into the closet, looking for the only other dress I owned. John bought me flowers. There was a smile on my face now. Oh, get over yourself, I thought. They couldn't be for Miss Stevens, could they? What would Daddy think? He wouldn't like it. I thought about a past occurrence. "Claudia, did you reveal your gift?" My mom asked. I blinked, staring over at her, but somehow she knew the truth. She smiled at the uneasiness in my eyes. "Are they asking?" Now it was obvious I had done something I wasn't supposed to. "It was just Trent, Mom. He's a friend. I trust him," I said as Mom helped me clean the makeup from my face. She handed me a tissue. "My dear, you're so naive. You know he loves you. Give him a chance. He can be good for you." I fidgeted when she said that. She gave me a grave smile. I didn't understand what she meant by that. We had just returned from the fundraiser Dad's client had held. He was an old man in his 90s. I'd met him a few times. He frightened me, because he was always so interested in me. She meant to say more, but she didn't get a chance. Claudia, nobody in that family can be trusted. I turned toward the masculine voice. Dad stood by the door. Mom got up and stepped over to his side. She looked up at him. He gave her a stern look, and then she left without saying anything else. Dad came to sit beside me on the bed. "Why are we moving away?" I demanded. "It's work-related," Dad said. I looked over at him. I was aware of the truth, and he knew that. "That's not true, is it?" I said. "Don't," he very quickly answered. His voice became firm almost immediately. He was good at what he did because he could read minds just like me, and because of it he had become a wealthy man and made our family very powerful. "But I like Trent. I trust him," I said, hoping that he realized it was my choice. "No," he firmly said, nearly yelling. "You don't know what you say. You don't understand what you're talking about. No one, not even he, can be trusted. I've given everything I had, and this is far too much. It ends here. I warned you about using your gift," he lectured. His voice softened slightly. "You don't know them like I do." He looked at me, lifted my chin, and looked into my eyes. "Your time will come, but it is not now." I snapped back into the present, looking into the closet for the maroon dress. It was strange to think I could have been married to Trent Valentine III. My life would have taken a completely different path. I looked at the dress in the mirror. It looked wonderful. I had worn it only once in the past. The boots were an added combination, not too shabby. Truthfully, they were all I had except for those ugly black shoes I refused to wear again because they were 5-inch heels. I hadn't even worn them for Trent, so I sure wasn't going to wear them for dinner. "You look lovely, Claudia," I recalled Trent say. I smiled nervously as he motioned for me to follow him. He was so handsome, but his smile sometimes scared me. We walked out onto the balcony. It was a quiet evening. My parents were socializing. My father was busy with business matters. Trent's family was very powerful, and my father handled most of their assets. "Claudia," Trent softly said as we looked at the moonlight above us. We were alone, and his security had been informed to keep anyone else from coming out onto the balcony. Mom had ushered me to follow him in the moment my father's back was turned away. I turned. I had a hard time looking up at him. He made me tremble, and my lips quivered when he looked at me with those large hazel eyes. "Yes, Trent?" I was wearing the maroon dress. He sent it for me to wear. Trent liked dark red on me. I carried my shoes in my hands. My feet ached, but I tried my best to stand on them now in front of Trent. "I want to ask you something," he softly said. He put his hand into his pocket and took out a black velvet case. "What is it, Trent?" I asked. My hands were shaking. Mom said I should be polite, and whatever Trent asked, I should answer like she had instructed me, especially for this. He opened the case, and inside was a large diamond ring, bigger than my finger. Mom said he was going to give me something very important, and I should say yes. Trent got on one knee before me and lifted the ring. Somehow I knew this was something he would never do, yet here he was doing it for me. I could see it in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Say yes," Mom had encouraged. "Say yes," Trent demanded as I stared at the large ring. I opened my mouth to speak. "No!" Father yelled and raced past the security and onto the balcony. He grabbed my hand. Trent came forward, and his security team came to assist, but he waved them back, allowing Daddy to take me with him. "You're making a big mistake, Nicholas," Trent said. My father pulled me away with him. Before my parents' death, I saw Trent a few times. He would come to our house and talk business. He wanted to see me, but Daddy wouldn't allow it. Daddy wouldn't allow me out of my room. He wouldn't allow Trent to even see me. I heard them arguing downstairs, but it was only Daddy's voice I ever heard. Trent never raised his voice. I blinked the memory away and moved toward the bathroom, brushing my hair and washing my face. Finally, I was ready. I often wondered about Trent, but not as frequently as I thought I would. John took the majority of my thoughts these days. I wanted to be in his arms again. He was a better fit for me. We both were to each other. I slowly opened the door, remembering the very night Daddy had given me the ticket. I was going to fly to Houston alone and meet them there. And when they didn't come, I lowered my head and came into the hall. I could hear voices in the living room. Mr. Claypool and Mr. Vasquez were talking to Joseph, and I could hear him as I came down the stairs. In the background, I could hear Miss Stevens laughing with Michael and discussing wine and whatever else adults like Miss Stevens like to discuss. God, she had Michael under her spell. Had Trent seemed that way with me? I always wondered why he wanted to marry me. I knew it had been arranged, but certainly not by my father. I could see it in his eyes. I hated having the ability to know things I didn't want to know. I came down the last step as I heard Mr. Vasquez offer, "So, would you like to join us? I was just about to head into the kitchen for another drink. You want us to get you a beer?" I heard Joseph respond, "No, I'm fine. I don't drink beer." I smiled. Joseph was suddenly popular with the men. He and John were different. Milton was not used to having them around. "No, of course you don't, sir," Mr. Claypool responded. "I'm just not a beer drinker, gentlemen," Joseph politely said. I couldn't believe John had told him about what he had revealed to me. I wondered what he really thought. John said he was okay with it, but I wondered if he would say anything directly to me. I came from behind him. None of the men saw me. Joseph had his back to me. I could see he was nicely dressed in some dark suit and slacks. He was always nicely dressed. I'd never seen him in a casual shirt or jeans. I was starting to think it wasn't his thing to be casually dressed. He was such a good dresser, especially in comparison to Mr. Claypool and Mr. Vasquez. They both looked sloppy. They were part of Milton, and I never believed Joseph or John fit here among the chaos. "Where's John?" I asked. Joseph spun around immediately. The silly grin that I had often found upon his face was there now. He was a nice person. His look softened. I came deeper into the living room with Joseph smiling widely at me. He was a large man, intimidating and nothing like Mr. Vasquez or Mr. Claypool. "Claudia, you look beautiful," Mr. Vasquez kindly said. Mr. Claypool came forward and said, "Now I feel out of place. If I knew we were going to get all dressed up, I would have just come straight here wearing my school slacks and dress shirt. Not that it would have made a big difference. Mr. Claypool's school attire wasn't much better than what he was wearing to dinner." "I just felt like getting dressed up for dinner," I said, regarding Mr. Claypool's words. I looked up at Joseph, who was still grinning. I smiled, feeling my face burning. I never had so many eyes on me before, including Joseph's. If only John were here. "You do look rather lovely, Miss Bell. I think John will agree with me once he sees you." "Where is he, may I ask?" "I asked him to get my laptop. I swear I'd lose my head if it weren't attached to my body. I asked him to pick it up from the school and take it back home. So if I'm not mistaken, he's probably just now getting home and getting ready. He should be here shortly, Miss Bell." He came slightly closer, looking rather innocent and bashful. "By the way, and John bought you some flowers." He chuckled. "Apparently my date thought they were for her." I blinked. I knew it. The flowers were for me. "I guess I owe you and John one," he winked. "Dr. Mueller, so we're meant to ask, should we come in tomorrow? I know some of the teachers weren't planning on it. We scheduled to open tomorrow, correct?" Mr. Claypool interrupted from behind. Joseph had that "did anyone hear my speech" look across his face. "The school will be open tomorrow, Mr. Claypool. Nothing's changed since my little speech. We will be open." Mr. Claypool seemed to grow silent, and he and Mr. Vasquez seemed to return to watching the game. If it hadn't been clear what the schedule was to them tomorrow, it was now. I think they were a little intimidated of Joseph. They had every right to be. The guy was as threatening in his appearance as he was in demeanor. It seemed no different with adults how scary he could be. Today, he seemed like a total sweetheart, at least when he was talking to me. Joseph turned to me again. "John should be here shortly, Miss Bell. Don't tell him I didn't give you the flowers." He smiled and winked. Suddenly, I heard another voice behind us. "I opened the white wine instead. I hope you don't mind, Joseph." Miss Stevens walked into the living room. She handed Joseph a glass of wine and drank out of her cup. I didn't understand his fascination with her, besides her beauty. He seemed like a well-put-together person. She was quite the opposite. How could he like someone as shallow as her? Miss Stevens ignored me and she walked past me. She probably just thought of me as a child. I just stared at her, wanting to turn over the sofa she was sitting on. The sound of her laughter was bad enough. How did he not get annoyed by her? "Stop, Claudia. Control yourself." I needed to be in control of my anger. Joseph's watch was moving rapidly, and I didn't want to alert him to something strange happening in our house. I began my breathing technique again. It was something I had always done whenever I was nervous. It worked for me. "What's this? Now?" Joseph glanced over at me. "What's she doing? Why is she doing that again? Is she okay? Will I have to give her mouth-to-mouth? I hope she's not having breathing problems. She might need to have that checked. Everything okay, Miss Bell? You're sure you're not having an asthma attack?" I'd forgotten his watch was slightly defected and I could actually hear him. I shook my head. His watch was moving again. I could see it from the side view of his sleeve. "I'm not much for red wines," Miss Stevens said, again. "Michael's opened up a nice white wine. Try it, you'll like it." He seemed consumed with me. When he glanced over at his watch, his eyes wrinkled. He began adjusting the dial. He must have increased the voltage. From this view, the hands began to move rapidly. They turned left and right, just as they had done when John had shown me what they could do once they located the disturbance of the energies. Joseph sat up. Something had alerted him and piqued his interest. He was waiting for the hands to come to a stop. "What is happening? Here? The energy source is here? Come on, baby, tell me where, lead me to it. Then Dr. Nicholson will have his prize and I will have my promotion. Come on, baby, track it." I heard it straight from Joseph's mind, before I lost the connection. He must have increased the frequency, or in some way the watch had adjusted itself. I stumbled away. He stared at the watch as if it were a foreign thing to him. Then it suddenly came to a stop, pointing right at me. I swear our eyes met and his widened enough for me to know he was suddenly aware what that meant. I knew clearly what he was thinking, even if I could no longer hear him. He looked like he wanted to race at me. He hadn't moved, but I could clearly see him edging to rise. Everything continued around us. Everything seemed to be moving in slow motion within these moments. I wish I could hear what he was thinking. But his eyes to me begged it not to be true. His gaze wouldn't leave me. It was as if he thought if he stopped concentrating on me, I would disappear. Miss Stevens put her glass of Zinfandel down on the side table next to the couch. I turned to leave, but Joseph suddenly rose and took 2 steps forward. I froze. Our eyes once more met. I bit my lip hard. Miss Stevens gazed up at him, grabbing at her glass again. She seemed to be longing for his attention. For the first time, I was happy she reached for his arm, to try and stop him. "Miss Bell, may I have a word with you? Miss Bell?" Joseph said once more, trying to entice me with a softer tone. "Come here," he ordered, motioning me with a long finger. I swallowed, shaking my head back. Was no one else seeing this? "John, where are you?" I thought frantically. He looked back at the men watching the game. They were all too busy yelling at the TV. The only other person interested in his attention was Miss Stevens. She started to speak again, trying to get his attention. I forgot to thank you for the flowers, Joseph, but I really prefer tulips to daisies. How could you have known if I never told you? So now you know. He wrinkled his eyes back at her. He appeared annoyed. I moved back. Miss Bell, he motioned over to me. I just want to talk. That's all, sweetheart. His smile now looked sinister. He seemed like an entirely different person. Joseph, didn't you hear me? What are you doing? She turned back to look over. I wanted to ask her to help, but she rolled her eyes over at me. Joseph, remember Mrs. Whitney? You know her, right? She continued. Joseph looked annoyed as he moved toward me. Miss Stevens grabbed his arm. He looked back over at her, then at me. He seemed so irritated. He wanted to get to me and, at the same time, seemed unable to react. I had an advantage. Until he did something I never expected. I didn't know the extent of what he and John could do. He turned over to Miss Stevens, put his hand on her cheek, and said, Schlaf. What? She said, glaring up at him. Will you shut up, Karen? He softly said. A metal spider emerged from the dial of his watch. She didn't even see it as it injected her on the side of her cheek so quickly that if I hadn't been looking, I wouldn't have noticed. He slowly lowered her head onto the couch, catching a hold of her glass and placed it on the table. Mr. Vasquez and Mr. Claypool didn't even glance back. They were too busy with the game. I moved back slowly. Joseph motioned me to him again. He dug into the side of his suit pocket and pulled out a metal device. It looked like a metal collar with electrical lights. Come here, Miss Bell. Come to me, I'm not gonna hurt you. I shook my head back. I said, come here. His voice became stern as he neared slowly. What did you do to John? How do you control him? Control him? I gazed at the object in his hands nervously. The slit of his lip curved slightly, as his fingers did on the metal of that object in his hands. This is not gonna hurt, I promise. Don't. Joseph, please, you're scaring me. You're it, aren't you? The person from the video in the parking lot. The one my boss wants. You disrupted our watches. You've been hearing me, haven't you? Come here. He motioned to me again. I sprung from my place and up the stairs. Joseph was on my heels. He wasn't as fast as John, but he was quick enough. I managed to make it to my room and was trying to close the door when he barged in. I backed deeper into the room. He slowly came in. He closed the door behind him, clutching the device in his hands. It's okay, Miss Bell. I just want to talk. Talk? I said to him nervously, looking all around for a way around him. Joseph smiled, playing with the device in his hands. He pressed a few buttons upon it. It started blinking rapidly. What is that? I asked, glaring at the object he was holding. It's a little something to keep you calm, nothing more. There's no way you're putting that thing on me, he grinned. Stay away. I mean it, Joseph. Miss Bell, just relax. I've been doing this for so long, it won't hurt a bit. Why? What do you want? I moved back. A breeze from the window hit my backside. You're a curiosity. The way you made my watch shut off. Even a minder can't do that. Joseph began closing the distance between us. I backed away as far as I could go. Minders. I had heard of those from John. People, or rather girls, who could read and move things with their mind. Please, Joseph, I don't want to hurt you. Joseph chuckled loudly. Little girl, you can't hurt me. Just walk to me. There's nothing to be afraid of. The same creepy smile wrinkled the sides of his lips. Miss Bell, relax. He leaped forward onto me. I pushed back. All I could see was his body fly back onto the wall. I dropped to my hand. Something was pulling me down, hard and quickly. There was a beeping sound near my ears, around my neck. I felt a strange coldness hug my throat. There was a click, and suddenly I felt paralyzed. I couldn't move, and dropped hard upon the floor. Joseph immediately appeared beside me on the floor. I told you to relax, darling, he said. The tone of his voice sounded unreal to me. It was the same tone he had given me when I had gone up on the roof. Cold and uncaring. the same tone a teacher I knew always displayed when I tried to explain why I was late to class. I couldn't move, nor could I speak. Something was keeping me still. My body felt stiff and held in place. I could hear and feel a buzzing energy stream down the nerves of my skin. I tried to speak, but I couldn't even form words. My lips would not come together to even form the simplest of speech. "Relax, Miss Bell. You won't be able to speak. Let me adjust it." He moved a few buttons on the metal device hugging my neck. I felt my jaw relax and loosen. "What have you done to me?" I whimpered. Joseph lifted me in his arms easily and placed me on the bed. I narrowed my eyes over at him, but unable to move my neck or face. "Please, Joseph, let me go. What are you doing?" He sat alongside the bed. "My job, Miss Bell. This is what John told you we do." Joseph grinned. "I never pictured you to be my target, but in this job you have to be prepared for anything. Sucks. I was starting to really like you. John's not going to take this well, but we have a job to do." He glanced back over. "Tell me, Miss Bell, do you know what you are?" Joseph took out another device. He dialed a part of his watch back. A few metal spiders came out. He directed what I guessed was an energy meter over at me. A blue-hued light washed over me. It appeared to scan me before it started beeping. Joseph wrinkled his eyes. "Off the charts. Dr. Nicholson is going to be very pleased with this. He's been looking for you. I was beginning to think you didn't exist." He grinned. "Once I report to him that I have you, he'll be here within the hour just to pick you up himself. He never makes house calls, but for this..." "Wait." He wrinkled his nose and narrowed his eyes over at me. "That's right. You've met him, haven't you?" He started laughing. "He's going to have a field day when he discovers you were right in front of him the whole time. He likes that sort of humor. Odd that the watches did not sense you. You must be able to control it at times. Did John tell you how to do that?" Joseph shook his head. "Does John know? There's no way he can't. I'm going to have a serious discussion with that boy, or he's going to end up in the containment unit for a month." "What was he talking about? What did they do to John if he disobeyed?" A few metal spiders crawled onto his arm and across his shoulders. He glanced down over at them, allowing one of those things to climb his fingers. "These things are so useful." He flashed me a playful grin. "Das Haus zu sichern. Schlafen. Secure the house. Sleep." I wrinkled my nose at him. What was he saying to those things? They crawled off his arm and shoulders, leaped onto the floor, crawled away under the door, and disappeared. "What are you doing? What are they going to do?" "Securing the house, Miss Bell. They'll make sure that we're not interrupted until I can notify the retrieval team that the target, that's you, has been secured. I think I'm making this delivery myself. Fuck those guys." He looked excited, something I'd never seen him display. "Let me go, please. I didn't do anything to you." "I can't be reasoned with, Miss Bell. This is what I do for a living." Joseph examined me with care. "You're certainly not a mind-bender. From the readings I've been taking, I'm thinking more along the lines of the source. Dr. Nicholson is going to be very pleased." Joseph chuckled excitedly. I tried to move my arms, but could do nothing. "There's no point in fighting. That collar is specifically designed to keep you secure and from using your powers against me." Joseph laughed again. "Gotta love those things. Makes my job a lot easier." Above, the pipes began to rattle, and strange sounds began to come from the bathroom sink and tub. Joseph looked toward the bathroom where the sounds were coming from. The sink began to gurgle along with the tub. I gasped and my breath rapidly increased. I felt the hair on my arms raise. A damp sweat gathered upon my brow as my breath grew faster. "He's here," I whispered. Fear was gripping my body. He was here, and he was angry. I could feel it. Even with this device, I could feel it. A shadow spread into the room, moving across the walls. Joseph walked towards the bathroom. The pipes were making cranking sounds as though something was trying to crawl from inside them. The house seemed to crank and settle, moaning as if it were coming alive. The metal collar around my neck began flickering and making strange noises, like an alien dialect I couldn't quite understand. I felt the numbness in my limbs only beginning to loosen. Was this device failing? Around us, the shadow figure moved on the ceiling and down into the corners of the room. A shadow arm swung down and slammed Joseph against the back wall. He fell hard, collapsing to the ground. At once he rose and grabbed an object from inside his suit pocket. He lifted out a small metal globe. It lit up and began to hover slowly. It moved into the bedroom, shining with a bluish glow. Around my neck the collar popped and fell off. I sat up as I saw a shadowy figure move across the room towards Joseph. The globe challenged it by releasing an electrical charge. It did nothing. The shadow hands bent its metal body, breaking it into shards. The pieces of metal fell to the floor. The shadow moved towards Joseph, pushing him across to the other end of the room. Quickly it came over him, lifting him and beginning to suffocate him. "No! Stop!" I yelled, but nothing happened. I looked around the room for anything I could use to fight. From the other side of the bed, a red light caught my eye. It was coming from inside the drawer. I pulled open the drawer and found a crystal, like the one Michael had shown me, and the one I had seen on Alex's wrist. I grabbed it and rose from the bed, walking over to the thing. Joseph seemed to be losing his fight with it. His eyes were rolling to the back of his head. "Stop!" I yelled. The thing turned. I saw two purple eyes. Its shapeless dark hands dropped Joseph and he fell hard against the floor. He didn't move. "You are powerful, and you are mine. I won't let them take you from me." The crystal in my hand began to glow brighter. The shadow began to pull back into the corner. Its shapeless form disappeared. I dropped to the floor. The crystal had taken something from me. I felt drained and weak. It dropped from my hand as I sat on the floor. The metal spiders returned from under the door and crawled back into Joseph's watch. He opened his eyes and gasped. As he blinked, he caught sight of me. Joseph sat up and reached for me just as I dropped into his arms. "You saved my life," he gasped. I looked up at him as he gazed down, holding me. He couldn't believe what he had seen, even though I knew he had seen a lot. Joseph looked over toward the window of the bedroom. Behind us, the door opened and John dropped on the floor alongside us. "Claudia?" he cried. "What happened?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at Joseph. He was unresponsive at first, but then I heard him say, "She saved me." John didn't understand. "John?" I whispered, reaching out to touch his face before everything went dark. The shadow was there trying to reach for me. I woke to find myself in my bed. I immediately sat up. Quentin was there by the window, looking toward me. Even in the darkness, I could see his shape sitting upon my window ledge. I heard him speak. We showed them we're a force to be reckoned with. No one will challenge us ever again. Once we are together, you and I, no one will challenge us. They can't, you see. We are powerful together. Very powerful. All I need is you." His shape leaped upon the bed like a blurry light and reached out. I screamed, waking once more upon my bed. John and Joseph were standing in my bedroom, one on each side of my bed. I looked around, but I could not sense him any longer. Was I afraid of him? Yes, I was afraid of what I was becoming when I was close to him. He made me into something I couldn't control. Soon, I feared I wouldn't care. I feared I wanted to be out of control.